So there's this white journalist, and it really impressed me because he was not just being a journalist interviewing the AFRIFORUM and just interviewing with some nonsense interview. He was pushing back very hard, and then he was interviewing this leader of the AFRIFORUM. I want you guys to watch this because the leader of the AFRIFORUM is so exposed, so bad by the way this other white person was pushing at him. This is a white person, by the way. If not white Afrikaner, is a white person. This journalist I'm talking about. Pushing so hard, and not just letting this leader of the AFRIFORUM just get away with saying some nonsense, with saying some other things that don't make sense. But of course, you guys are going to make your own conclusion based on what you hear. I heard what I heard. I made my own conclusions. So you will tell us what you think from what you're going to hear now. I want you guys to listen to this.
He says he wants to have an investigation. That's fine. He said he's cutting it immediately. He said things are happening to people in South Africa, a certain class of people. I presume he's dog whistling there, in fact, to his supporters. You're playing a very dangerous game here, and isn't the consequence that we've lost $440 million for people living with HIV?
Stephen, you are playing a very dishonest game here by saying that that's the direct result of what AFRIFORUM is doing. Our direct result is getting under the president's attention, the Expropriation Act. He was going to cut off aid to dozens of countries all across the world anyway. What he's talking about here is additional measures to combat particularly expropriation without compensation. The dangerous game is not AFRIFORUM. The dangerous game is the South African government passing laws that directly attack private property rights in this country. And also the dangerous game is the South African government having 141 race laws on the books. Just 20 minutes ago, Elon Musk made a tweet responding to President Ramaphosa, asking him in his words, why does South Africa have openly racist laws? And Elon Musk is 100% on the money. That's the dangerous game. That's what needs to stop. And I'm very glad that the world is taking notice, finally.
Okay, but you said at the very beginning, that's why I asked the question, in case you did not think that this was the result of your work, that this is the result of your work. It would surely be foreseeable that this is what Trump would do. Yes, of course he is cutting aid to other countries. There was a waiver signed by Mark Rubio in terms of HIV treatment. That's a completely
separate policy. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
You're trying to conflate those two to create this moral panic around what's happening, to say that, look how evil you are. That's not true. What's happening is the South African government is threatening private property rights, and the US president is saying he won't stand for it. There's going to be additional measures from what I can see in regards to what Trump is announcing here.
Okay, there are various things going on here, right? One of them is that you have been to Washington, your organization, you're very proud of your influence in Washington from what I can see. The second thing is that you have a US president now who talks about a class of people who are being treated very badly. Who do you believe he's talking about?
He's talking about the people in South Africa that are constantly attacked by the politicians for the color of their skin, the minorities that are constantly scapegoated for all the failures of the ANC. He's talking about the minorities that are targeted by the race laws on the books in this country. He's talking about those minorities targeted, for example, by policies or that you saw, for example, in Dis-Chem, where that internal memo leaked a few years ago, where the promotion and hiring of white people was completely barred by under threat from government fines. To try and ignore these realities is to push your head into the sand like an ostrich. They are there. There are people, especially minorities, being targeted in this country by legislation, and the government is open about it in their rhetoric.
You seem to be a little nervous about using the phrase white people. Why don't you just say it, Ernst? It's white people he's talking about in your view, right?
Because it's not just white people, it's many other minority groups in this country as well, in particular white people. That's why it would be dishonest to say just white people. There's nuance here, Stephen. I mean, that's the whole point, that's why AFRIFORUM says we are bringing the facts to the table. We're not a political party. If there's nuance, we bring the nuance to the table. I mean, do you have a problem with that?
Not at all. I completely understand nuance, and of course we see it in the leadership of AFRIFORUM from time to time. The point here is that you went to Washington, you say you're so worried about the Land Expropriation Act. I'm sure it's a bill that you've studied and many, many times. The fact is it talks about nil compensation in cases where land has been abandoned or is not being used productively. All of the experts I've spoken to who are neutral lawyers, they do not have a political agenda in any case, have all made the same point. As a result of the President's signing of the expropriation bill, now an act into law 2 weeks ago, virtually nothing is going to change. The US, in fact, Trump's government has the right to expropriate land in the public interest, and that's what this all talks about. Is it not the case that you've gone to the US and you've hyped everybody up, and this is the consequence?
No, that's a very disingenuous way of putting it. A very sneaky argument to put it even more bluntly. The issue is not expropriation with adequate compensation, as you see all across the world. The problem is the Expropriation Act enables expropriation without compensation. Now, you can play the little language game of euphemisms of null and no compensation, but when your employer tells you, I'm going to pay you null this year, or I'm going to pay you null this month, I dare you to tell him, oh, I'm so glad that it's not no salary that I'm going to be paid. Null is a euphemism for no compensation. It just means that the government is going to do their little sums, and then they're going to say, well, we've factored in our little our agenda, and that means our sums say you deserve null compensation for your property. That is expropriation of without compensation by a different name. And if your legal experts are telling you that, then they are absolutely politically biased and not playing an honest game.
All right. So, Ernst, after all of this time, 30 years into democracy, right? No farms, no land has been taken without compensation. The point of this act is particularly for cases where land has been abandoned. This happens. I mean, it happens around the world where no one can trace the owner's passed on, there are no descendants. I mean, you'll be aware that this has happened. The fact is that government needs to do something about all of that. What you're doing is conflating this with other issues, making it a big story. To put it bluntly, and let's talk about what we're talking about. This government is not coming for the land of white farmers, is it? You don't believe that?
Well, this is the same government that pushed to enable expropriation without compensation through the amendment of the Constitution just a few years ago. They showed their hand.
But it didn't vote in favor of it in the end, did it?
Oh, wow. So, I mean, I'm calling it attempted murder, and you're saying, well, they didn't succeed in murdering anyone. I mean, that their intentions are clear. This is the government that said, after that failed in Parliament, ANC cadres went to the media and said, now that this opportunity has failed, we will use other avenues to get the same ends, such as the Expropriation Act. Okay. That is in the words of ANC representatives. Okay. So when it comes to what you're talking about here, should we only make noise after human rights have been violated, after the government has started expropriating without compensation farms? Or do you actually warn people that the government has granted themselves the power to do that? You act preventatively. You do not wait until human rights violations and atrocities have happened to say anything about them.
Okay. If President Trump phoned you now, and I mean, things happen, okay? You say that you're very connected. If Donald Trump had to phone you now, if President Trump phoned you now and said to you, look, have I done the right thing here? Should I restore this money to government because I'm worried about what's going to happen to the people who receive HIV treatment through this? And should I choose another tack to put pressure on the government? Would you say yes?
Again, you're trying to disingenuously tie this to a completely separate policy regarding aid. No, you can't just say, well, this is now unique to South Africa when that's a completely separate policy. You're not playing an honest game here, Stephen. You should be ashamed of yourself. Sorry.
Ernst, I will decide whether I'm ashamed of myself or not. Thank you. But I'm offering you an opportunity to separate.
I hope your conscience tells you that.
I'm offering you an opportunity to separate the two. That's why I asked the question.
Sure.
So should we separate HIV funding and government pressure from Donald Trump onto our government? That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm offering you, in fact.
All right. Donald Trump is on the phone. What do I tell him? I tell Donald Trump exactly what we tell him in our letter to Mr. Trump. AFRIFORUM's stance is that he should punish the politicians pushing through these destructive policies, not the citizens of South Africa. That has been AFRIFORUM's stance for years, and it is still AFRIFORUM's stance in 2025. That is the simplest way to put it, and the US is completely within its right, morally and practically, to put pressure on the South African politicians that are pushing South Africa to the brink of chaos and lawlessness, and pushing us to the brink of violation of the constitutional right to private property. Okay. And that's why AFRIFORUM sees this as such a serious issue.
Okay, but he could still put pressure on our government and restore the PEPFAR funding, is my point. He could do that.
Sure, that's absolutely
Okay.
possible. I mean,
Okay.
AFRIFORUM that's not part of AFRIFORUM's stance that he should cut off aid. AFRIFORUM's stance is that he should punish the politicians enacting and pushing through destructive policies.
Ernst van Zyl, thank you, Head of Public Relations for AFRIFORUM. As I'm sure you're aware, a conversation that will be had many times this week around the situation that we've seen with US President Donald Trump's action.